Today on Success in RPGs, we're going to look at how to hone our skills as a creator. How do we find effective ways to improve our skills over time? How do we identify the key areas where we should improve? How do we open our minds to new ideas and inspiration? All today on Success in RPGs. Creators will often tell me they don't want to think about what they've created in the past. And I think that's really interesting because to me, we want to be really aware of what we've created in the past because we should be really happy about how much better we're getting over time. And the real danger is if you look at your old work and it's perfect and you're not afraid to look back at it, well, that means you haven't improved, right? So the ideal scenario is actually to look back on our old work and go, wow, I can do a lot better now, right? So how do we do that? I'm going to start with 3 ways that I find are the most effective for improving our skills over time. Our first tip is going to sound obvious. Consume good work. Yeah, of course, right? But, it's surprising how often folks will say to me, I work on 5e, I love 5e, and I'll say, great, what'd you think about the latest book they put out? And they'll say, I actually haven't read that yet. I've been too busy creating. Okay, sure. What'd you think about the previous one? I haven't read that either, right? So if you want to create 5e work, you should be up to date on what D&D is creating officially and also what third-party companies are creating, right? And that is hard. That is time consuming. And that's what makes this not really such an obvious tip and actually a hard tip. We want to press ourselves to consume good work over time so that we are learning from the best and the brightest that are out there. By consuming official work, we're also seeing exactly how D&D is changing the language over time and their approach over time. And we want to work off of that and learn from that. We also want to see the innovations that third-party creators will do in the field. Reading official work or work from the third-party companies you really admire, it's really helpful to self-assess yourself. So I recall one time I was reading a part of Icespire Peak that Chris Perkins wrote, and it was so good. A really good distilled words, tight language, that really it was evocative and it made it exciting for the DM to want to run this. And it was clear that it would create good play at the table when the players were at the table. Despite my lack of time in my own life, one of the things I agreed to do a couple of years ago is to be on the Mastering Dungeons podcast. And one of the reasons I did it was because I knew that having to every week talk about the latest hobby developments, the latest D&D works, that would force me to read those things and know about them. So I read hundreds of pages of the latest D&D material so I can talk about it on the podcast, right? And it holds me to that. So one of the tricks we want to do is to find what are the tricks, what are the ways that we will convince ourselves to consume this good work, right? I also have our wonderful Patreon Discord, and thank you to our Patreons for making this show possible. On that Discord, they're often sharing really cool ideas, and then I have to go consume those and figure out what do they do for the game? How do they fill in gaps in what's officially available? And what gaps might I fill or what might I learn from what they're doing? And this is so important because if we don't stay up to date on what's being created, we won't know how to make the most of it or what advances are happening, right? If you create Powered by the Apocalypse games, right? And you're not aware of what other folks are doing in the area, well, then you're probably not going to learn the best ways to create what you want. If you're writing for Shadow Dark, you want to consume all of the cool third-party Shadow Dark material that folks are creating, both for pay and free, because it's really exciting and it gives you new ideas for how you can use those really cool core works to create more and better, right? And this is true regardless of what type of a creator you are. Now, I think mostly as a writer, as a designer, right? But let's say you're an artist. You want to see what other folks are doing with their art so that you can learn from their tricks. What perspectives are they bringing into it? How do they capture and frame a scene, right? If you are an actual play person and you want to think through how to make your actual play the best, you want to consume great actual play and see how do they achieve that? How do they keep an audience? How do they promote? How do they design the set? All of it, right? So depending on what your field is, you may have a different way that you're consuming work so that you can get better and better over time. And you might need to sort of trick yourself into doing this, right? You don't want to see a reading pile just grow, but not actually, make progress on it. So maybe what you need to do is form a reading club with some friends, right? And say, hey, let's all read some things and tell each other about what we picked up, right? Maybe you need to set aside a time once per week that you go off and find cool blogs that will inspire you and read the best that you can and learn from that. Maybe you want to carve out a time when you say, okay, for this hour, I'm going to read the latest D&D book and make progress on that, or the latest whatever the RPG is that you're interested in. That's a way that we can dedicate our time and sort of trick ourselves, convince ourselves to make progress on this process. This next item is also going to sound a little obvious, right? Which is to create often. So we're consuming often and we're creating often. And, if you get reliable work, well, you might be creating often. But there's a trick to this. And let me go back and say, maybe you aren't creating that often because you don't have reliable freelance work or you have a really busy life. And that's where it can be important to create just for the sake of creating. Now, later you might end up using those creations in a product, right? But just creating to learn. Writers say this often, right? If they're like novelists, whatever, you just want to write, just want to practice the act of writing, or drawing, or graphic design, battle maps, whatever it is that you create. You want to do that often. As a writer, I find that the more words I write, the better I get at distilling down my language so that it is tight, so that it is effective, conveying the thoughts and emotions that I want to see carried forward to the reader, thinking through the audience. And the DM is a critical part of the audience, or GM. I want to think through them and have it be so that my words will go straight from what I've written to being effective by the person who reads it and uses it, right? And that is hard. That is not an easy thing to do. I will never do it perfectly. And part of the fun, part of the excitement of being in this industry is that I know that I'm going to be getting better and better at creating every time I do it. And if I look at my old works, I see that those words were not as lean, were not as tight, were not as effective, right? Or as evocative. So I'm always trying to create so that I can learn from that. And this is better if we are thinking through and being analytical of our writing. That doesn't mean you have to tie up the writing with this thought process, but we write something, and before we turn it over, maybe we want to think, or after we turn it over, we want to think to ourselves, okay, what was really good about this project? What do I find a little lacking? Maybe I'm too wordy, right? Like I am often wordy, or I'll have a lot of ideas. Did I have too many ideas? Am I getting better at picking from all the ideas I have and using the best ones, right? By creating often and asking myself questions, then I'm really improving my skills. I'm not just getting better at writing, but I'm being introspective about it, right? Similarly, we want to look at how we can improve upon our goals, right? So when we go to write and it's a certain type of product we're trying to create, maybe because that's what somebody's paying us to do, or because we've chosen to write this, we start with initial goals. And so as we're creating, are we hitting those marks, right? Are we working well to hit our goals and enable them? Or are we straying from them, right? Asking ourselves those kinds of questions as we're creating is really helpful. So we may say, hey, I'm going to create a bunch of magic items for a supplement, and they're all going to be really short common items. And then suddenly we start making these legendary, complicated things, right? So that's where we're straying from our goal. Similarly, if we find that we are skipping the outline process and it hurts us, or we are overcomplicating things, or we're making assumptions about what our reader expects that may not, in fact, be true, right? So when we go back and we give our work to somebody, they say, I'm going to make some edits here because I think the reader will not understand what you're trying to do here. You know it in your head, but it's not here. Those kinds of questions, right? So we're creating often and we're asking ourselves how our writing is coming across so that we're getting better and better. If you're an artist, a parallel to this might be thinking through how you work off of the art order, right? So an art order comes in and tells you what's expected out of the scene that you're designing. And you may find that sometimes then you get instructions, no, really, we wanted this, right? Like, can you go back and this was an emphasis for us, but you didn't really hit that. So those are the kinds of learnings that you can do that are similar to how a writer's learning over time, but apply to other fields. Okay, now for our third, the last of the big tips. Here it is: play and run games often. You know, it's interesting having kids because the way that kids are taught today has changed to emphasize the fact that when we do things, when we really put it into work, we learn better than just when we memorize and restate, right? And this is the same kind of thing. We may be consuming a lot of information, we may be writing often, but we are writing for a game. We are creating for games. We want to play and run games all the time so that we see the actual application of it and we really learn from it, right? If you want to be an expert in Free League games and write great content for them, you should play and run Free League games often, right? If you are a map maker and you make these really cool battle maps, you want to actually see them get used. And this is actually something that I've seen a fair amount with smaller, newer battle map makers. They will show you something that's really, really beautiful, but it's actually hard to put miniatures on it and hard to know what terrain is sort of decorative versus you can't move through it or that you could use it in some way. So while it's very gorgeous, it isn't as useful, right? And that's the kind of thing that when you use battle maps in play, these things will come up often, right? The other thing is if you want to have expertise out of a game, like let's say that you focus on character builds. You want to play with lots of characters and see all those amazing characters in action so you learn from that process, right? If you want to talk about DM tips, you want to see how DMs are running lots of different games and play under them and pick up those different techniques, right? How do different DMs handle initiative? How do they handle introducing an NPC? How do they take a scene where it's supposed to be a negotiation and really convey that to make it exciting? How do they go back and forth between the different players at the tables, right? All these kinds of skills we pick up when we're actually playing or running the game and we're seeing how this is taking place. A lot of creators I speak with, they are running a home game. They've got their group that they play with and they will often play test things there. And that is another way that we want to play and run games often. We can play test our creations, and play testing with our friends is great because it's a nice, safe space where we can do that. But we also want to try to, as part of playing and running games often, we want to do that in public with people we don't always play with. That's tough, and it may seem a little uncomfortable, but it's hugely effective. I'm fortunate. One of the things that I think really helps me as a creator is that when I play games and run them often, it's often at a convention. And I might do something like run the same adventure that someone else wrote 5 times, 6 times, right? And at each of those tables, I get to see and experiment. If I change the approach to a scene, what effect is created? If I have a player of a certain type that's not really engaged, how do I pull them in? And how could that actually be in the text of the adventure, right? And I also get to play games at conventions. So I see these totally different DMs that have very different approaches from my own, different backgrounds, different interests, and how they make the game evocative for me, right? From that, I can learn and I can think through how to write scenes. Okay, so consuming great work, creating often, and playing and running games often, those are the top ways that I know to hone your skills. But here are a couple of other ones. The first one is to try new and different games. Each game is created by designers that are sort of aligned along a certain type of approach. There's variance, yes, but there tends to be alignment around the experience, the approach, all of it. So when you try new games, you get new ideas in terms of what the game experience is like, but also the design of it, right? So for example, when I worked on Hero Quest, which you can see over one of my shoulders, that is a board game, but it's telling a kind of dungeon exploration story. But it does so in a very different, focused way. Working through that taught me very different skills that I can now apply to how I create other types of RPGs. When Gumshoe came out with its idea that when the players go to investigate something, they will find the main clues. That was so significant a change that it led to this sort of idea, making it into many types of RPGs because it was such a cool concept, right? And so useful to breaking down problems that were in games like D&D. Different types of games have different styles of design. One might be very short and succinct, right? So, for example, we see some games that have stat blocks that are very tiny, and other games have stat blocks for monsters that are enormous, right? Those differences create different types of chops for designing, right? And so, if we try our hand at playing, running these types of games, even reading them, we will learn new techniques towards the design. We will also identify what areas might not be natural for us. So, if we play a game that's really story heavy or very improvisational, that may be new for us and kind of hard. Similarly, a game that's super tactical, that might be a challenge for us. But in reading through these games and trying them out, we will gain new experiences. We also see different ways you can portray a narrative. So, take something like running a kingdom, right? This will be expressed in very different ways in a board game versus in D&D versus in a science fiction game like Eclipse Phase, right? Or in something like Gumshoe, where you might be trying to run a detective agency. And whether the game has rules for that or not, just the basis of the game will color that experience and create new design ideas. Trying new games is invaluable. I know I put this as number 4, but it could compete, I think, for many of us with those top 3 techniques, because new games will be an amazing source of inspiration over time that open you up to all kinds of new ideas. You know what's even better than working on honing your skills? Doing it with a community. When you join a community, especially a community of creators, you get to bounce ideas off of each other and share what you're learning and share your growth over time. There was a recent panel at GameholeCon where the question came up of, how do I reach out to somebody who's very famous and established? And we talked about that, and that is a valid question. But I also said, hey, you know what? Don't just shoot way up high. Find people that are your kind of level, whether it's starting out or, a few products in your belt. Find others like you. Join a community, because that's who you're going to really be able to create a lot of back and forth, a lot of interesting ideas, and you'll be on the same page, right? I'm looking to try to grow my audience. I'm looking to try to learn about these sort of marketing principles, right? When you're in a community with other creators that are like you can really make progress at this kind of growth of your skills. You can share the different skills that you're honing on and say, how did you do this? How did you accelerate this faster? How did you become a better writer? How did you become a better designer, a better editor? Communities also help us when we hit walls. Like maybe we have a design problem. We're trying to create a ship-to-ship combat and we can't think through something. You bounce it off of a bunch of cool creators and they're going to give you some really neat ideas. And they may actually point you to resources you've never heard about before or games that have solved this problem in different ways. Community members also help overcome barriers such as figuring out how to do any kind of things, like from running a blog to running into problems with Photoshop, you name it, right? Creative communities can solve lots of issues that you have. Another way to hone our skills is to seek out learning opportunities. This can be courses we sign up for, and there's some good ones out there in the industry. This could be regularly finding blogs that teach us important skills. This could be panels, whether it's watching them online or at conventions. But looking out for those opportunities where someone is providing you with actual teaching, right? With a instructional format that you can participate in and improve yourself from. This is very valuable. It's hard to find in this space, but I mean, look, you're watching Success in RPGs, right? This is an example of that kind of thing. What else is out there? What other video series are out there that you should be checking out that are providing valuable information? What panels are, what conventions regularly run great panels, and do they put them online, right? Seek out those kinds of opportunities and you can gain great improvement from them. Okay, our last tip is to seek feedback, right? We're going to be creating often. We want to learn from that process. And this can be hard for a lot of us, right? Because feedback makes us vulnerable, but we need to do that so that we can learn, right? We need to have a good, honest assessment and a healthy one of how we are doing and where we can be better, right? So when we turn in a work, we want to say to the person that we turned it into, hey, if you don't mind, I'd like to reach out in a couple of weeks and ask you for some feedback, right? And do that because when we hear from the employer how we did, that's great. Or even our audience, right? Like we might see comments written, and comments can be all over the place. But what are the kernels of truth there in the product that we created and how we might make it better next time, right? We want to hone our skills over time. So we want to have an assessment that's healthy and honest about how we're creating and what we're doing. Playtesting, right, is fantastic. But playtesting requires that we are playtesting with people who will tell us what they think in a constructive way, right? We want to be able to dissect that and make notes on it and figure out what improvements we can make over time that aren't just the thing itself, right? Like if we're doing ship to ship combat, oh yeah, the catapults should reload like this. That's fine. But at a larger level, when I'm creating a subsystem for a game, what do I tend to do that I could do better, right? What are the skills where I'm a little weak? And I might ask an employer, hey, could you let me know what kind of skills you really value? And were there any skills that you think that I could really work on to be even better next time I do an assignment for you, right? Most employers will really value that, right? They will value a freelancer, a team member, a creator that comes to them and says, hey, help me be better over time, right? And it can be really valuable at times. A lot of times when I reach out, the answer comes back, no, it was great. Okay. But sometimes you might then find them at a convention or in some other online space, and you can reach out to them and say, no, really, give me some feedback here. What do you think? Is my writing too wordy? Is my writing, does it need a lot of development, right? And in what areas? So those kinds of skills, that kind of feedback, we can relate that kind of feedback to specific skills that we can work on over time. It's maybe worth mentioning imposter syndrome here, because imposter syndrome comes from kind of applying a lens to ourselves that's unhealthy and thinking that we can't possibly be worth where we are. Practically everybody feels that way. I wrote an article about this on alphastream.org. You can check out. Even Matt Mercer has imposter syndrome, right? And what we want to do is, instead of being critical of ourselves, we want to think about, how do I get even better? And that's the approach I'd encourage you to take when it comes to feedback, when it comes to introspection, is I'm good, but I want to be better. How do I do that? So I'm going to continuously ask myself that question. Okay, so this is the point where we've covered the topics, and you might go, that was a great video, let's forget about it. No, here's the list. Let's not forget about it, right? Let's remember this list and let's make it actionable, right? So consume good work. How do you trick yourself into consuming awesome stuff in the games for which you create constantly, right? How do you do that? Think through, take a few minutes and think, okay, how can I make sure that I am routinely consuming good work? Come up with a plan for how that can happen. Creating often. If you are not already creating often, what can you do so that you secure some time in your schedule to periodically create something, anything, right? Even if it's at the outline level, it'll help, right? Or something like the Dungeon 23, where you create a dungeon every single day at some light level. Create often, right? Come up with a plan for how you can be sure that you're doing this constantly. Playing and running games often, just a few different board games or RPGs a year will change how you create. So come up with a way that you can do that. Maybe you join online games like the virtual weekends with Bald Man Games and play some of the types of campaigns or settings you would normally play. Or maybe you find a convention that has a virtual play, and you can just attend and play one or two games and just experience those, right? Or go to a great convention like GameholeCon if it's affordable to you. And that's a convention that offers a lot of different games, and it's not super hard to get into them. Like if you want to play not D&D, real easy to do. If you want to try freely games, real easy to do there, right? And there are conventions that specialize in different types of games that can be new to you, and you can sign up for a few and be sure that, hey, once a year, I'm getting a weekend where I'm going to play 4 different new games and really think through what they do for me. Playing and running games often, right? So to do this, we want to think through, how is it that I'm going to do this? Am I going to have a home campaign that is reliable and I'm all the time participating in this? Am I joining conventions or online play like the virtual weekends by Baldman Games? Those are all great ways to play. We just want to have enough games happening that we really know the game for which we create, and we can tie into the next piece, try new games, right? So something like GameholeCon, if it's affordable, is a great convention you can go to see a lot of games of a lot of different types. And it's relatively easy to land some seats, right? So you can try a lot of different games, see all these different players and how they approach things, how the different GMs approach things, right? That's an excellent way to both play games and play and run games often and try new games. New games can also be the concept of joining a group where we talk to each other about different games, right? Or being exposed to forums or another Discord or online space where people are often talking about different games. It can mean getting some different PDFs and just setting out some time to where we're going to read through how different RPGs work. How does Blades in the Dark work? How does Apocalypse World work? And how is it different from Dungeon World, right? Let's think through these things. And by just virtue of doing that, what is Gumshoe, right? What are the different Gumshoe games and how do they differ? And what's special about them that keeps people like Teos talking about them all the time, right? What does 13th Age do? And what's 13th Age 2nd Edition going to be like? Just a little time can help you in a big way to make those gains around new ideas, new concepts, understanding, interesting design. You know, I want to film that all over and fix creative as a typo, but I'm just going to admit that I spelled it wrong, and you can have fun with that. It's just a reminder that we all have ways to improve skills over time. So, hey, join a creative community, and that's how you spell it. And this is invaluable because if you, I know I say that a lot, but it really is. When you have really cool creators that you are part of their kind of team, kind of their family, and you can exchange ideas, it's going to be really good for you. So create even, right? Create your own Discord channel and bring people together. I mean, a lot of like DM's Guild creators sort of just gathered up together off of this energy of like, hey, we want to exchange ideas. You can do the same, right? Hit up a forums like Ian World, find people of like mind, get them into a Discord or some other place where you guys can regularly talk and chat, and find great ways to exchange ideas. Seeking learning opportunities can tie directly into that. The more people you have to say, hey, what are some good places where I can turn to, right? Maybe it's a place like the Storytelling Collective, right? That can be a really useful place. Or there's another one called the Undisputed Academy, which B. Dave Walters has run. I haven't tried it, but I know that the Storytelling Collective is really well ranked by folks who've taken it. So seek out a coursework like that, right? Seek out places, conventions that post their, like Big Bad Con will post their panels online, find places like that. Conventions, if it's handy to go to a convention, if it's affordable, then find ones that have great panels and attend those, or seek out recordings of them. That's an awesome way. And feedback. We've talked about that. So making this actionable, at the end of every project, ask for feedback. It's that simple. When other people are seeing your creative work, ask for feedback. If an editor sees your work, ask for feedback. Or if you're an editor and the writer gets to see the work after, ask them what they think, right? Or if there's a developer, ask the developer what they thought when you turned in your, say, line and copy editing, right? So I hope this makes this actionable, and I hope this video has been helpful for you. So what's next on success in RPGs? I don't even know. See, I've got a lot of really cool ideas that I want to cover, topics that are super interesting to me. And so I've posted on our Patreon asking for you to tell me what you think I should do out of a bunch of possible topics. So thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. And if you are all interested in supporting this show and joining our community, it's a great creator community. And also you get to give me ideas like what the next show should be. So I look forward to finding out. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time on Success in RPGs.